start did it. Let me make sure. Is everyone in? Yeah, I believe everything is set and we're live. Is that right? Is anyone in the audience there capable of chatting with me that's not a Bamboo employee to let me know that we are active and you all can hear me, see me, and things are working? Sweet. Thank you, Eric. Thanks, Sean. Appreciate it. Awesome. So we can see the screen. Let's get started. So there was a little bit of an intro about why we're here today. We are Bamboo Solutions. If you've probably heard from us or heard about us because you're on our mailing list and you got this invitation somehow. So we thank you for being a part of our database of contacts and people that we love to share information with. So you know a little bit about us, I'd assume at this point. That said, though, we are a global leading provider of solutions in general that just extend anything in the Microsoft 365 ecosystem. It's where we live. It's what we love. It's our passion. And we've made quite a few great, successful customers out in the world supporting that platform, and we'll continue to do so. We've got lots of great customers. Like I said, we've been doing this for quite a while. I think we're coming up on a couple of decades, I think, performing this kind of work and working in this space. And, a little bit of a flex there. We've got some great customers, some large ones and some small ones. We support everyone of all sizes. So you name it. We've been in probably that vertical in that industry, and we've supported solutioning in those areas, especially specific to your needs potentially. We're a gold partner, and all the things, all the the credentials and the things that make us stand out. We obviously care about those things. So, anyways, like I said, 15 plus years, coming up on 20. I'm pretty sure. I got to figure out what that exact date is. I see that Rob's on the call. Rob is the founder, president of the company. So Rob and I, we need to get together and figure out that exact date. I'm kind of curious when our anniversary is coming up, if we haven't had it already. But we've got loads of products and solutions. We've actually got 50 plus tested solutions that we sell as products, and you all can browse those from our website. Again, super happy customers, lots of them, 8,000 plus worldwide that we've supported over that time, which means it's a great opportunity for us, for them to have used our products, to also be interested in our consulting and professional services as well. So it's been really good for us to sort of combine both of those fronts. And so again, just kind of stating that, if it's been done out there in the world, then we probably had our hands in it and that experience to really understand those problem sets and bring a lot of great subject matter expertise to any solutions or problems you might have. We cover all the things in the 365 platform. I'm sorry, I just jumped the screen. As well as the Power Platform, which, it's all kind of encompassing in the 365 space. But something that people don't typically believe or sort of understand about our professional services capabilities might be that we also live in that cloud virtualization space, right? As we all know, the service that's providing all of these services, 365 and Power Platform, is Azure, right? And so just by nature of the way that it's hosted and the way that it's served to the rest of the world, right? We've had to come to understand and learn it and provide that level of expertise on Azure in general. So we definitely live across the space wholly, right? All encompassing, if you will. Today, it's going to be myself and Tom Conry on the call. I am a technology strategist here at Bamboo. So what that means is that I lead a lot of the architecture discussion with our customers, and so I can help provide a bunch of the the pre-sales engagement, solutioning, the idea generation or the ideation, we like to call it, right, and all of those services around really making you feel comfortable and engaging with us, whether it be products or services, and letting you know that we have the solution for you, right? And that's really the role that I feel here in that capacity. So, Tom Conry on the call here. Hey, Tom, want to introduce yourself?
Hey everybody, my name is Tom Conry. I am a Microsoft 365 architect. Really the past 10 plus years focusing on this cloud virtualization, right, with a heavy focus on this GCC High, GCC environment over the past several years. So, lifting and shifting things from point A to point B, CMMC compliance, and everything else around that space, portal builds, app builds, you name it. So it's been a good road, good run.
Absolutely. Thanks, Tom. Yeah, so let's see here. Let's not jump to the final slide. How did I get a black slide in here? All right, so what we're going to talk about today are really the GCC migration efforts, right? So we've been doing migrations in SharePoint for a long time. Microsoft 365, on-prem to Microsoft 365, commercial primarily, right? We've been getting customers off of any platform you can imagine, whether they're SaaS products out, third-party SaaS product type environments, Dropbox, Box, et cetera, or they were SharePoint on-premises environments, and we've been helping do those upgrades in place, or database restore migrations for customers, large ones too. I mean, really large ones. And so with all that experience, right now we've sort of been adapting that to this government cloud, this government community cloud. Right. And if you're not familiar with the government community cloud is, we're going to spend the next few slides sort of talking about what that is and some of the details and specifics around what those things are. But ultimately, what I want you to know is that it's very similar in nature, going from an on-prem or even a commercial Microsoft 365 environment and moving on over and reaping the benefits of getting into the government community cloud, which is the GCC, I'm going to call it for short for the rest of the meeting here. So it's the GCC or the GCC High environments. And then there's a third environment called DoD, and there's a whole bunch of other environments spinning up from what I understand as well here in the future. Things around retail, things around manufacturing, all these sort of vertical specific, that they can provide these rich experiences to those specific verticals, right, in the times of need. So anyways, so today we're going to talk about what it looks like, what it feels like as we go through one of these migrations with these customers of ours, as we bring them out of the 365 commercial space. What does that look like? What are those limiting factors? What are sort of the hurdles we have to jump through to do that? And then again, briefly, real quick, we'll discuss some of the specifics around what GCC is, or GCC High. I just wanted to call out real quick, we do have a partner that we work with, DoD Security. So we provide all of the migration services for their customer base as a sort of a white labeled solution, if you will. And DoD Security is an MSSP. If you're not familiar with what that means, they're a managed security service provider. And so as an MSSP, they've obtained a wide Rolodex of customers, and they've got a very large customer base over there, and they provide all of the managed IT services and cybersecurity services for companies. Primarily DoD contractor type space customer base, but pretty much just any of those services that you might need on a managed basis and consistently. So part of that company's business is getting their customers into the 365 GCC High space, and that's where we come in. So this is how we've obtained a lot of our knowledge and expertise over the last couple of years. And we've really grown into something that is very streamlined, it's templatized, it's standardized, and we've pretty much seen all of those hurdles and roadblocks that you might experience as you go through that. And so that's what we're trying to share with you today, is what that looks like. So thanks to DoD Sec for that partnership, and here we go. So let's briefly touch on what is the Government Community Cloud. The Government Community Cloud, again, like I said, there are primarily three basic environments types, and that would be the GCC, the Government Community Cloud, the GCC High, and the DoD environments. And as you can kind of tell, the DoD stands alone in its on its own, if you will, and it gets its own isolation of 365 services and offerings, so that it's a little bit more segregated for their specific needs, and there's not really a great chance of any sort of overlap, some leakage between environments, et cetera. All right. So the GCC environment, and this is Microsoft's language. So I'm bringing Microsoft's language from the Microsoft documentation to give it to you straight from their perspective and their definition of, right? So the GCC environment, it really is focused around providing an environment for which you can more easily already meet some of these compliance and regulation requirements that you might have in your particular space. So, for instance, if you're in the DoD contracting space, or you're supporting the public sector, or any local and state governments, or even tribal entities, right? You may have these requirements to meet, like FedRAMP High, or DFARS, or you might have some criminal justice requirements and regulations that you need to meet. There's it's primarily if you're working with CUI data, right? Then you might need to get into one of these more lockdown, more secure tenants that will set you up for success, like right off the bat. So you buy a G1 license or a G3 or G5, which is like the similar comparison to an E1, E3, E5 on the commercial side, right? You buy one of these licenses, you're getting a tenant in this environment that's segregated from the rest of the world. It's got security just innate to it, right? Provided by Microsoft. And it's already been audited by those that need to audit to stamp that at a baseline, we meet these things, right? Now, as we get into the slide deck, we'll have Tom talk about some of the ways that we extend that configuration and take it even more steps further so that we can configure it in more secure ways so that we can meet even more specific requirements like CMMC, right? So the GCC High environment, very similar to GCC, almost the same situation, just kicks it up a notch, right? Now we're in another segregated environment, GCC High specifically. It's completely isolated from GCC or commercial or DoD, right? In its own security boundary, if you will, and has more stringent and extensive security configurations applied to it, right? All the way up to DoD, which is just a whole nother segregation of that, right? We've kind of talked about. And specifically, you go into the GCC High environment. Traditionally, this was happening. Companies, public organizations, right, that had a need or have a customer that allows them to work with that CUI data, right? We're moving into that high space as opposed to GCC because the customers they were supporting were already in the high environment, right? And so there was a need for them to be there as well so that they could sort of mesh in their collaborative and productivity tools and work together in that fashion, right? And the same, so GCC and GCC High, currently in the context of primarily most of our business is bringing organizations into a CMMC level 1 or level 2, which I don't know if you guys are all aware, but CMMC level 1 and 3 have now changed to levels 1 and 2. So anyways, most of our customer base was focused on reaching those levels of compliance. And so what we found was that for our level 1 customers, we were taking into GCC if we could help it, right? There are more, we'll get into the features and parity and things like that, but there was no reason to take them into high in a more lockdown state if we didn't have to, right? And so for a level 1 CMMC organization, we could take them into GCC. For a level 3, what used to be 3, which is now 2, level 2, we would put them into GCC High in most cases and get them on their way. And that's sort of some background there on how our user base has moved into those spaces. All right. So, you know, specifically, I don't know if you guys are all aware, but Microsoft provides a website called the Microsoft Trust Center. And the Trust Center does a really good job of highlighting all of the regulations and all of the compliancy requirements you might have to meet as an organization, regardless of what industry you might be in or what vertical you might be in, right? So there is every regulation you can imagine is on that site. So just do a quick Google search, a Bing search, if you drink the Kool-Aid, right? And go search for the Microsoft Trust Center. And it's going to highlight all of these commitments that you see here on this slide on the right column. It'll highlight all those and every other one that is out there. There's things out there for manufacturing organizations and legal firms, and there's, you name it, there is a regulation or a compliancy requirement, right? HIPAA, et cetera. So in this case, in our customer base specifically, right, we find, and this is Microsoft's table. So again, straight from Microsoft stating that, the offerings here already have these commitments met just by providing that baseline technology, that foundational level of it, right? We all know that security is everyone's responsibility, right? So you can get a baseline from a SaaS solution like Microsoft 365, but we all know there's more to it than just saying, all right, here's a product, it's just naturally secure. That's just not the case these days, right? So anyways, at the baseline level, GCC meets these commitments. And I just wanted to call these out in case that you as an organization had those requirements there listed in the right column. You could quickly map that out, right? And typically, and I think basically, and most simply stated, it's the ITAR piece that really takes the need for a GCC High environment with some of the DISA SRGs, which are those, what are they, the security recommendation guides or something like that. I can't remember the exact acronym there, but DISA's regs have different levels to it. So as you move up in, if that even applies to you, if you move up in those levels of security guidelines needed for your organization to meet your customer needs, then that's a quick way to identify what environment maybe you should be buying into. Okay. All right, I'm moving pretty quickly here, so feel free to ask questions as we go through this thing. The chat is available to you all. So if I need to pause and answer some questions, I would love to do so. There's, again, not going to be a really long discussion today, but I am moving kind of fast here. So Tom, we'll get to your section here in just a moment, and we'll have Tom talk about some of the processes we go through. Just to pick up where I was, so some of the benefits of the government cloud, I mean, they're obvious in most cases, like I got to be there. Benefits or not, I have to move there because my customers are there or the data that I work with is there. And so I just want to highlight that some of the benefits for actually using the platform and Microsoft's statements are that the content is logically segregated from the rest of the 365 commercial offerings in the world, or even the other types of environments we just talked about, GCC High and DoD, right? So it being segregated, you can rest assured that it is in an environment that even the people who manage the infrastructure that all this data lives in and resides in Azure, right? Those people have elevated security clearances and background checks and all that stuff, right? Like so just note that all the data is stored there. It is always going to be stored in the United States. There is no question about anything that you do in these environments, GCC High and DoD, there's no question it will leave the US. It just will not happen, right? The government has bought into it. The auditors have approved it and stamped it. They have validated this as truth, right? So just rest assured, data is safe. It's in the US, so you can meet all those requirements. And then, like I said just a moment ago, all the people at Microsoft that have any access at all to these environments are go through those background checks, those elevated security clearance type processes, et cetera. 365 government complies with certifications and accreditations. Yeah, so well, yeah, again, the Trust Center, check it out. If you're really interested or you have a specific question that maybe your legal department or someone is asking you about how this service from Microsoft might satisfy this need or this requirement, that would definitely be the place to go to really sort of help yourself discover that information. If you have questions about that and we could be of assistance, always reach out to us. We'd love to provide that to you. So the eligibility. So the first thing is as you go through this process to determine whether or not you need to be in the GCC space, the government community cloud, right? There's an entire website on Microsoft's documentation that will step you through the deployment plan for getting into that. And it highlights this in phases. It's like, first you got to plan for it, right? So what does it mean? How's it going to look for our company to move everything we've got over there? And what's the timeline of something like that? How do we even do this, right? And then secondly, the second piece of that question is, am I even eligible to go there, right? Am I eligible to even get a GCC or GCC High environment? So that we can work in that space. And so I just wanted to call some of those, very basic, simple details about that out today, because I wanted you to be aware of sort of how that works and what that looks like. And if you don't know already, it is well detailed, and there are, it seems like hundreds of pages on Microsoft's site that will help you really understand the intricacies of that. And we have an entire team behind us, right, that knows these answers already. So if you have those questions, please do throw them at us. We may not be able to answer them here on this call today, but we can definitely get back to you with that information. But at a high level, federal, state, local, and tribal entities, right? These are the agencies, the organizations within our government at all levels are just by default can pretty much get through this eligibility phase to get access into these environments, right? The piece that really applies to most people that might be on this call are not those organizations, so I'm not highlighting a lot of specifics around that, but it would be those commercial private entities that are probably on this call today, right? I'd assume, or maybe even educational institutions, or you name it, right? And so for the most part, the simplest way to put it is that these accepted government data types, if you work with them, would potentially make you eligible to jump into one of these environments, okay? And then those are things like the ITAR or if you're working with CUI data in some way, which is controlled unclassified information. You probably know what that means if you're here. The DoD, if you work with the DoD as a support, in a support nature, and you work on content that needs protection, you're probably eligible, yeah. UCNI, we've got the Department of Energy, UCNI, which is, I can't remember if that's naval That's nuclear. I mean, sorry, nuclear information is what I meant to say. The criminal justice system, I think a lot of what DOJ does is and qualifies under CUI and CJI information. So if you support the Department of Justice or any of its entities in some capacity, more than likely you might be eligible for that. And then anything else, if you coordinate with the government in some way, right? And you can prove that through some contract agreement or something like that, that eligibility phase pretty much goes pretty seamless and moves along very quickly, I will say. So just high level stuff there, definitely not specific. And I know everybody on this call probably has a very unique situation and a specific question, and we've definitely got the team to answer that for you. So let us know if we can help. All right. This is where I'm gonna hand it off to Tom for a little bit. So we're just gonna talk about our process as we go through that that experience with each of these customers. And Tom, yeah, I'll hand it over to you, and then I'll take the reins back when we get towards the end, and we'll close this thing up.
Okay, great. Thanks, Kevin. All right. So, as Kevin said, every month we're doing multiple organizations from space A, right, to space B. Space A could be anything that I've listed out here. So we've got G Suite to 365, GCC High, or perhaps GCC, right? So what does G Suite look like? G Suite's going to be Mail, Google Drive, and shared drives. So the effort there is we lift and shift the mail that comes across. It comes across the wire over to the GCC High Office 365 experience. No issues, no quarrels there. Oh, what happened to
I don't know what happened. It just went black on me. I'm sorry.
Oh.
There we go. Sorry about that.
There we go. Okay. And then outside of Mail with G Suite, we get the opportunity to move Google Drives. And so you have a personal Google Drive that's associated with your G Suite account. And typically I just move that over to OneDrive. So there's a direct parity there. That's a direct mapping. Then we have shared drives. So think of those as kind of like Google's version of a document library that's shared by multiple teams. And so in those instances, I look at what's there, what teams have access to it, what personnel or users have access to it. And typically I migrate that over to a new SharePoint site that I've created on Office 365 into a library with the same name, something like that. And that's gone pretty smooth so far. Slack to 365. So we have the ability to move most of Slack conversations over to Teams conversations. And so the limitations there are far and kind of deep. It really just moves the initial collection of one-to-one chats. Not any of the features and functions that Slack offers. None of that moves over. It's just one-to-one chat, one-to-many chat will come over to a team. And I've done those several times. A Dropbox. Dropbox is relatively straightforward. So as we know, Dropbox is just a file folder structure. And so that there's a direct parity and just a direct migration path to go from, a Dropbox personal account to a OneDrive, or a Dropbox shared account or shared collection of files and folders over to a SharePoint site. And so that's done pretty easily through the migration tools that I have. And then lastly, commercial, right? So commercial is just a strict tenant to tenant. And so that tenant to tenant, that experience is going to be Exchange. So that's going to be user mailboxes, shared mailboxes. It's also going to be Office 365 mailboxes and any SharePoint sites associated with that. It's going to be Microsoft Teams. It's going to be SharePoint proper, I could say it that way. And then Microsoft OneDrive. So commercial tenant to a cloud tenant, that's a relatively bigger lift because there's really 4 or 5 sources versus Slack is just one source, Dropbox is just one source, G Suite there's 2 sources effectively. So in any given month, we get presented with the list of customers, and it could be either a G Suite to 365, it could be a commercial to 365, and by the way, we also have Dropbox and Slack with this commercial. So it's just kind of a mix and match of a different recipe of what we're collecting and moving from A to B. Are there any questions around this piece in the chat there?
Yeah, I don't see any yet. I'll let you know if I get some questions here.
Okay. All right, we can go to the next slide.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what does this flow of operations look like? So how does it come into, how does it come into DoDSec? How does it come to my work stream on our team here with Bamboo? How do we engage with the customer? What's that process look like from end to end to where I say, hello, I'm going to be migrating your stuff from A to B, to hello, I've migrated your stuff from A to B. So we do an initial kickoff call, and that's the engineering kickoff call. Prior to that kickoff call, DoDSec, they've done all of their BD and those kind of things. It's trickled down to our team now, the engineering team. And so we have that kickoff call with the customer. And that's a chance where I get to just have a real informal conversation, right, to understand their sources of data, be it commercial, be it Dropbox, et cetera, and ask any questions. We were asked questions around understanding their DNS, right? So what's your current vanity domain? What is that going to? Are you changing URLs? Are you hosted by GoDaddy, HostMonster, all the things, right? What does that look like? And we have just the deep technical discussions around how much content do you have, right? Are we talking half a terabyte, 7 terabytes, right? What does that look like? Do you have any network shares? Are you going to move from network shares up to OneDrive, network shares up to SharePoint? All the things. Once that concludes, then we run into starting the playbook. And so what the playbook is this is a roughly about a week engagement. We've got it down to kind of a science at this point. So within a 40-hour block, roughly, we can complete a full CMMC compliant government tenant. And that is everything. So it's all of Azure side, SharePoint side, collaboration, Exchange, you name it, it's in there. And so that, we had a slide change. Yep. So applying all CMMC levels 1 and 2, NIST 800-171, all the CIS benchmarks, the most recent benchmarks that were released at the end of last year, and then most recently, working to apply benchmarks as it applies to Google Workspace. So that's everything that we complete and conclude in this playbook. We set that environment up. Once that environment is set up, it's fully configured, it's fully secure, it's, call it government ready, effectively. And then we move into, go back to that slide.
With the migration.
So then we do the migration. Now the migration is split out into 2 work streams. There is a migration readiness that happens, and there's the actual, we'll call it the click of the button, right? So things over the wire. So the migration readiness, that includes getting your source environment ready and the destination environment ready. I think it's common that people understand and think that it's kind of just a click of a button, right? You identify source, you identify target. When in reality, there's a whole readiness piece that happens, and that is preparing the source. You got to create certain migration accounts that have certain licenses applied. If it's a G Suite, there's this whole activity of enabling APIs, right? So you got to enable like the People API, the Mail API, the Google Drive API, so that the migration tool can talk to source, and then it can lift it over the wire, send it to Azure, and then plop it over into the tenant. Similarly, over on the destination side, you have to create those accounts for it to receive that information. You got to create a migration account, and you got to open up all these different ports and all the things. So that activity I've got down to 2 or 3 days, roughly, to get the environment just ready. That readiness also includes on our migration tool that's setting up all the jobs, right? So there's about a whole night shift or day shift of setting up the jobs. So getting the jobs configured, getting the source and destination mapped out, getting the user profiles created, the user mapping created, all that stuff loaded into the tool that I use. And at that point, now I can move on to the actual migration. And so there is where I click the button and I monitor jobs as they come over the wire. I monitor the jobs for speed, rate of transfer. If things get snagged, I monitor throttling for Office 365 tenants because we do experience some throttling. And in that vein of monitoring throttling, some of the mitigation risks and things that we try to really accommodate for that throttling is scaling our migration jobs across multiple servers. So I have a cluster of machines that we have like a dedicated console and then multiple server agents. And we try to scale those jobs across the servers, really in an effort to give the throttling reduced as much as we can. Right? So if you scale it across multiple servers, then Microsoft's not going to recognize that it's coming from the same IP and all these things. And so it tries to reduce that throttling for us. because we try to move an environment roughly within a week's time. So about 40 hours standard to get we'll call like a normal, 200-300 gigs from A to B. All right, I think next slide. So at the end of what we'll call the initial migrations, what that looks like is I've set the jobs up. Let's just kind of recap what I've done now. So I've set up my jobs, I've done the readiness, I've clicked migrate, I've got the initial pass of all my content seeded in the destination environment. Now what I need to do is I need to cut over DNS. Right? So there's an activity where I go to the old environment, I go to the new environment, we cut that DNS over, we do all the MX records, TXT files, we make sure that mail is flowing into the new environment. We do that through just a quick message trace to validate that that's good. And then we run a final delta. We make sure that any of the content prior to that DNS cutover has been brought over to the new environment, right? And that typically happens on that Sunday night of whatever week we started, right? If we started the migration on a Monday, we try to close it out by a Sunday night. Then Monday morning, we do a handoff to the customer. So we come back and we do a debrief and say, hello again, good to see you again. We talked last week about what I'm going to move. Now let me show you what I did move. And this is an opportunity for the engineering team, so myself and the engineers that support the migrations, to work with that customer and just answer any questions they may have, right? If it's G Suite to a 365 environment, then there's a lot of questions around, hey, this is new to me. I've never seen Office 365 before. Where is my Google Drive at now? What is that? And so we just walk through that experience with them. Your Google Drive is now OneDrive. So let's show you what that looks like, right? If it's a commercial tenant or a tenant to tenant, it's pretty straightforward. In that instance, it's typically just a URL change. If you think about, you're used to using Office 365, and I've brought you to a new 365 environment. So. And then there is a last piece of that. It's handed off to a DoD Sec support team, and they do what we call the profile migration. So, now that we're in a GCC High environment, you have to have your devices compliant and wrapped in Intune policy. So that is where that support team does the profile migration from your non-compliant profile to the compliant profile. And so now your machine gets adopted to the Intune policy, and it becomes a domain, domain connected device that's cleared and covered by the security implication or policies that we've set forth in that tenant. And that's it. So then it goes into just O&M state.
Awesome. Thanks, Tom. So yeah, that's really a high level, again, in like 5 slides and I don't know, maybe 7 minutes, what that process looks like, right? And there are lots of intricacies in the details for all of this process. So every customer is a little unique. Every kickoff call goes a little different. Every, postmortem is a little bit richer and, specific, right? So as we go through these processes, right, we've like I said before, templatized and standardized sort of, best practices around what we're seeing through each stage of this as we help migrate these customers on. And something I wanted to bring up is that, the playbook slide there, we talked briefly about how we're using CIS benchmarks. And, most of you on this call are more than likely going to be in the 365 space because it's titled GCC, which is a very Microsoft thing. But, if you didn't notice here, Google Workspace is a new thing and a new offering from Google. So maybe you thought you had to go to GCC or GCC High previously, but from Google G Suite or something like that. Well, today and just recently, Google has announced that they can now meet the FedRAMP and the NIST 853 and ultimately the 171 requirements for that sort of DoD contractor space. So what that means now is that we've got to get in the business and really solidify, moving customers into that Google Workspace as well, because it can now meet those needs, whereas it couldn't previously. And GCC was pretty much the only name in the game that could provide that service. So something to highlight there, something to note. As far as GCC High limitations or GCC limitations, maybe you're in the 365 space and the commercial space currently, and you're wondering, like, what am I about to lose, right? Like, as soon as I turn this thing on over there, all of a sudden, right, things are going to be so secure. I can't talk to people. People can't come in as guest users. Well, it's such a blurry line at this point. And I wanted to fill this slide up with all these specifics, like external user guest access is difficult in Teams, or you know what though, like 2 weeks ago, something changed in the tenants we were working in, and now external guest users can come in. So it's moving at such a rapid pace at this point that it's difficult to lock down any one or two or three things that are limitations to those specific environments, right? Previously, it was difficult to communicate with people outside of GCC High if you were in GCC High. So you couldn't like directly communicate or hold Teams meetings with GCC users or commercial users if you're over in the High environment, and that's not the case anymore, right? Like it's just, again, the rapid pace of Microsoft development is tough to keep up with, and we love trying, and we will continue to do so. But I just wanted to say that if there were limitation questions that you have, I wanted to at least account for that, offer you the opportunity to raise those questions here, and then let us get you some answers on that as it sits right now, right? So, and again, Teams, SharePoint, OneDrive, you name it, right? Those limitations, there are a few there. There is no feature parity between the platforms, obviously, yet, but it is being worked on, and they are definitely trying to make that happen. In the GCC environment that I support for the Department of Energy currently, right? There is no app marketplace. I can't install third-party apps in the SharePoint store. Is that coming soon? I bet you, but I don't know yet, right? As a timeline for that kind of thing. So that said, right, like it's tough to stay on top of the details about the feature parity between these environments. There is a tool for you out there. And if you're interested in sort of self-help and self-service, looking at some of the specifics around what's coming in these environments, this tool is available to you. And this is the Microsoft 365 roadmap. And I think I did an entire webinar in this probably about 4 months ago. This tool is very useful, especially if you sit in a position to sort of have and hold some of the strategy and the planning for what it is your organization is doing with these tools. This tool right here will allow you to filter down by the specific cloud instance that you might want to be in or are in, such as the DoD, GCC, or GCC High. And if you filter that down, you can see all of the products that Microsoft offers in the 365 platform and where they are in their release plan, right? If it's not there already, or if it's already been released, you can see there in that little thumbnail or that screenshot, right? Like there's 3 stages that products are in or features are in the 365 roadmap, and they're either in development and coming soon, or they're rolling out now and they're going to be in your tenant in the next 2 or 3 months, or they've already been launched. So between the 3 of those categories, you could very quickly identify sort of where that feature parity gap might exist for the tenant year, the type of environment you want to move into. So I wanted to put that in your hands. If you haven't seen that already, real simple search on the internet, Microsoft 365 roadmap will get you right there. It's the top link every time I do it, so it should be for you too. But I would check that out and see where you sit with that. I don't have a Q&A slide, but I would probably open the floor up now if there were any questions to be answered. This is a lot of information. There's so many unique opportunities here for your organization to take advantage of the platform. So I can't cater to all of the specifics, but I would love to be able to offer you someone to bounce those questions and ideas off of. So please do that. You can definitely get a hold of us afterwards. sales@bamboosolutions.com. If you've got any questions about that process or the technicalities or specifics of the process, please do that. Again, thank you all for your time today. It's been a very brief webinar, but I appreciate your time. I know our time is valuable, so thank you for that. I'm going to stay here for about a minute. Yep, we'll hang on here for just a moment and see if we can't get any last minute questions coming in. But if you need to go, totally appreciate that. Thank you again for being here.